Welcome to Science Fiction Video Lecture number 3. And in this particular video I want to talk about critical lenses and introduce them to you. You'll be getting a handout as well. And first, don't forget you should be taking notes. You should have all of this on a piece of paper with some space so that you can fill in the details that I'm going to be providing you in this little lecture. So first, what are critical lenses? The definition. Critical lenses are a way to look at a piece of literature or pretty much anything, like a situation. It could be nonfiction, it could be movies, in a variety of different perspectives. For instance, when we are often in English classes, a teacher might ask you to see if you can identify with the hero or the protagonist. So if you were in the character's shoes, how would you respond? And this is a pretty typical way of introducing a type of literature in a classroom because it helps students maybe make a connection to that particular story. This actually has a name. This is called the reader response lens. So there's lots of different kinds of lenses, and you may already sort of know some of them, but you just don't know the terminology. And when we read and look at situations in the world, we often apply a number of these different critical lenses at the same time. So what we try to do sometimes in a literature class is to tease out some of those different lenses and then see if it gives us a different kind of perspective or a different understanding of that particular story. So on the handout that you're going to get in class, you'll see there's feminist, there's psychological, there's autobiographical or historical, Marxist. These are just a few of them. However, you can probably delineate those even further into little subcategories. And ultimately, there's all kinds of different lenses that you could probably think about and come up with. And I'm actually going to include a link here in YouTube and also on my website to some other resources. That'll be over here, the additional resources for other types of lenses. Ultimately, we can pick a number of different lenses and apply them separately to the same sort of story and get a different perspective each time. So it can be kind of interesting, and that will lead us to the why in a couple of minutes. For the Fellowship of the Ring, one critical lens that I think about quite a bit when I'm reading the story and rereading the story is how does Tolkien treat the female characters in his story? Some of you may have already noticed this and wondered why the female characters don't seem to have much of a role. They sort of look pretty, they have beautiful gowns, they have beautiful hair, maybe a line of dialogue or two, but really not that much. So these are the kinds of questions that you might consider. And it may relate back to Tolkien's own life in some way. It may be historical and the time period. So there's a lot of interesting aspects that you can consider when you start to apply a particular lens to a story. When I have students start to do some writing around using a lens with a particular work, we run into some sort of setbacks and some struggle with the terminology. One way that I would recommend is to think about you as the critic or the person doing the analysis. You're the one applying the lens. Tolkien was just writing his story. He wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to analyze my story, or I'm using a lens myself. So one piece of wording that can be, or one little stem that can be helpful is you could do it like this: the book, blank, or Fellowship of the Ring, when analyzed through blank, whatever lens you've chosen, this critical lens reveals. So Fellowship of the Ring, when analyzed through a feminist critical lens, reveals, and then you have sort of the start of your essay, if we were doing an essay on that. Another component that I find people struggle with is lenses. L-E-N-S-E-S is the plural form, and lens, L-E-N-S, is the singular form. So paying attention to that when you start doing some writing. And then finally, why bother? Which is always a really good question for anything that we're doing in education. I believe that using critical lenses helps us develop our critical thinking skills even more. I've often found that in a classroom environment too, that it is one of the few times that I see students get more engaged with what they're doing, because it allows for a lot of different kinds of discussion. So it helps us develop as critical thinkers, helps us develop a new perspective on maybe an old story, and it gives us a variety of ways to analyze other texts, media, world situations, what have you. So once you start getting some of these different terms down and starting to understand them, you begin to internalize them in a way, and you can find yourself looking at all different situations in so many different ways. There's not necessarily a one right or wrong way to apply a lens, as long as you're providing textual evidence for your own discussion or for your own argument. Additional resources, you're going to have that handout that I briefly mentioned. It comes from a book called Critical Encounters in High School English by Deborah Appleman, in case you're curious. And then I also found 2 links that you may find helpful. One is on the OWL Purdue website, which I actually have a link on my main webpage to, but I'll find the specific spot and I'll put that on my school website as well as here in YouTube. And I found another resource that's actually geared for teachers, but there's some interesting information within it that you might find useful. The person who put this sort of whole lesson plan together uses some common books and analyzes them sort of in brief, just with some brief ideas, applying different lenses to, for instance, like Harry Potter or Twilight. And you may find that kind of interesting too if you want to find some more information. If you have any questions, please let me know. We'll be doing a little bit of work with critical lenses towards the end of this week and moving into next week. So be sure that you take these notes into your notebook, and also make sure that you can answer these kinds of questions right here. Sort of, what do you know after you've watched the video? What kinds of questions might show up in a quiz question? So pay attention and do some good thinking around this, and I hope you'll find it useful. Thanks.